The highest martyr seeks not to enter heaven, but enters hell willingly for the sacred. Would you sacrifice everything for something higher, a higher principle? You have heard about the martyr that fights against injustice in the name of God and enters heaven. But what is not the ultimate martyrdom, but to enter hell in devotion to the highest of principles? In Islam, the devil, Iblis, fell due to the fact that he refused to bow to Adam. He refused to follow God's order of bowing before Adam. This is usually interpreted as an act of arrogance, because Iblis felt that he was better than Adam, and thus he refused God's command out of pride, as he refused to bow to Adam, who was made of the earth rather than of the fire, like him. But bowing, sujud, is worship, and you are not supposed to worship anyone except God. And this could be interpreted as a sort of arrogant literalism or criticism of literalism, or just a general story about a fall, about how the devil came to be. But there is also another interpretation that is also found in Islamic traditions, especially in the traditions of Ibn Hallaj and Al-Ghazali's reading of Iblis. These are interpretations of Iblis not as a figure of mere rebellion, but as a being who chose annihilation rather than betrayal of what he believed was the highest truth. And it is one of the most powerful mystical interpretations in all of Islamic thought. That refusal to bow, not out of arrogance or really pride, but out of absolute loyalty to Tawheed, that only God is to be bowed to, that there is only one God that is worthy of worship. This is a spiritual tragedy of cosmic proportions. Iblis in this sort of reading isn't a cartoon villain, but rather he is a figure who refuses out of what he believes is loyalty to something higher, the singularity of God. His pride or his clarity, depending upon how you read it, leads to isolation and damnation, but with a certain tragic dignity in it. In Islamic mysticism, in Sufi thought, Iblis is sometimes portrayed as the most tragic of all, not because of his refusal, but because he shows eternal pride in a principle over returning, repenting, and seeking forgiveness, caught between hell and defiling the most sacred of principles. He chose hell. In this reading, Iblis is not evil in the simplistic sense, but rather he is the existential martyr. He knows the truth and still chooses the path that leads to his own curse, his own damnation, because bowing would mean betraying the oneness he cannot deny by his will. The angels who bowed before Adam were without a free will and could thus not do anything but obey God. But Iblis, having a free will of his own, could choose to disobey God, and he did, not out of animal instinct, but out of free will, out of a willful choice to follow a principle to the end. What Iblis does in this interpretation is what Albert Camus called revolt, not in the sense of violence, but in the refusal to surrender. He wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus cursed to push a rock up a hill for eternity as happy. Why? Because in his defiance, in choosing to push the rock anyway, Sisyphus makes the universe answer to him, not the other way around. This is also the story of Prometheus chained for giving fire to humanity, Antigone who defies the king for unwritten divine law, or Milton's Satan who proclaims better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, or Nietzsche's Übermensch, forging meaning out of the void, and standing against the crowd for something principled and sacred for oneself. Or even if we are going to go into anime fiction, this is the Major from Hellsing and his human will. Seriously, check that anime or manga out. It's awesome, Hellsing is awesome. But what binds these characters all together with Iblís is not their righteousness. It is not always about being good or evil. It's about something much more terrifyingly human. The refusal to surrender the self, the will, the last inviolable flame, even if it costs everything, to dedicate their lives to a principle, as an act of pure will. It's dangerous, yes. It can even turn monstrous, but it can also be the only voice of conscience when the whole world screams obedience. And maybe that's why it fascinates us so much. Not because one worships defiance, but because in a world that often demands surrender in disguise, surrender to lies, mediocrity, conformity, to evil, to society itself, the one who resists for any reason at all becomes an embodiment of something higher, pure will exercised for a higher cause. And seeing characters and persons like that, you ask yourself, could I stand as they did? Would I burn rather than bend? The fire of the will is the final redoubt of the human being, the thing that makes one not a machine, not a beast, not a puppet, but a human with a will. Even if I'm destroyed, it is my destruction. Even if I'm wrong, it is my wrong. I would rather be damned by my own fire than saved by erasing it. Iblís is in a sense the fire of the expression of the will and self, and touches upon a core feature of the Abrahamic religious traditions, because unlike in Buddhism or in Hinduism, whether in Judaism, Christianity or Islam, the individual is seen as a moral agent with free will, capable of disobedience or devotion, responsible for one's actions caused by that free will, made by that free will, standing before God as an individual person, not dissolved into a cosmic ocean with no force of their own will. Even in submission to God, Islam literally meaning submission, it is a conscious act of a free will, not a surrender of selfhood, but rather a choice that affirms it. I choose to submit, or I refuse to submit by my own will. In Christianity, Christ's crucifixion is not a passive act, it is a chosen sacrifice. When God, in Christianity, chose to sacrifice himself by his own will, by his own act of mercy, as an inspiration for humanity to follow in his footsteps. In Judaism, the ongoing struggle with God, the very meaning of the word Israel, affirms the tension and value of the human will, to struggle with God's command, to be engaged in struggle, spurred on by one's will to either follow it or to diverge from it. The will is not merely tolerated in the Abrahamic traditions, but rather it is a central sacred concept at the core of the Abrahamic traditions. And philosophers and thinkers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, even in their widely different views, all wrestled with this tension between being an individual with a free will, with one's own will, and being dissolved into something else, and all of them, in their own way, sided with the individual will, even when it led to pain, madness or despair. Just like Iblis's act of defiance out of his free will led him to damnation. Because hell is preferable to surrender one's will. It is a principle worthy of hellfire. Because one's will and exercising of that will stands above pain. Please do subscribe as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.